This Late Night Linux Family podcast is made possible by our patrons. Go to latenightlinux.com/support for details of how you can join them. Support us on Patreon for access to ad-free episodes and early releases. That's latenightlinux.com/support. Hello and welcome to episode 108 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm May.
Welcome back all. Old Nerd wrote to us. Recently, I have been given several, double-figure numbers, of older laptops, basically the ones that are not Windows 11 compatible. The company that donated them to me has said they will be donating more in the near future. I want to give these to Linux noobs, the type of person who wants their own laptop to run Linux on and play and learn without fear of trashing their other computer. Could you mention that if you want a laptop and live in or can get to Maitland in New South Wales, Australia, Maitland is roughly 40 minutes drive inland from Newcastle, you can have one. I stress that these machines are free. If a listener is too far away to collect in person, then postage can be arranged at cost. I'm not trying to make any money on this. I can be contacted on Discord, Old Nerd, if anyone wants to reach out. So yeah, I don't know if you know, but we've got a Discord. I never really go there. I think if you hate Discord, then maybe email us, show@linuxafterdark.net, and we can kind of put you in touch. But this is pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah. It's better than e-wasting things or just having them around your bedroom. Not that I would do that, just in piles.
Or in a pile around the corner where your desk is.
I don't have an X270 sitting next to me at the moment with no operating system on it.
And likewise, I don't have an L380 sitting next to me with no operating system or a half-installed copy of Fedora on it either.
So thanks, Old Nerd, and yeah, get in contact and get yourself a free laptop to play with.
In Australia.
Let's do some Linux hot takes. Chris, you've got one about people being too defensive.
So yeah, this comes from a toot by Julia Evans, who writes sort of Linux zines. I've got one of her books. They're very good. She just did a little blog post, having not blogged for a while, about switching to Helix, the editor from Vim. And the first follow-up she said is, I forgot how angry people get when you post anything online. And she said, literally just, I got tired of managing my Vim config, so I decided to stop using Vim for now. And people just pile on. That's it. As if it's an extension of their physical being that they use a specific tool. And I do think sometimes it's to the detriment of kind of community and everything. Just because you feel like a tool is the best way to do something, it can really easily trip over into just incredibly overly passionate people. Well, we get them writing in.
Yeah.
We do, but then I see people doing backups without ZFS and I think, what are you doing?
It's tricky because, ZFS is a good example. It's hard to advocate for something else once you're really into it because it does feel like things lose a lot. But at the same time, I'd prefer that someone did snapshot or something to one external USB drive than just not do anything at all. At least you have a backup strategy. It might not be as good as it could be, but also it's not my backup strategy for your files. And that's what people tend to react like. I'm not coming around your house and backing up your files onto a MyBook Duo. Calm down. I just said that it wasn't for me and I'm using something else.
But I think that's where the difference is. A lot of these people don't just say, this isn't for me and I'm using something else. They get really tribal and angry about their preferred text editor or desktop environment or whatever it is, in a way that can come off as a little bit obnoxious. And then that's where the arguments start.
We all do it as well, right? I mean, I do it. I find it hard. Text editors are a good example. It doesn't actually really matter which one it is, but people are bolting on loads of helper features. And this comes back to, when I was at school, people were copying things off the internet to hand them in. People were also reading the internet and writing really good essays, having digested the information they'd found. So you can't make a blanket judgment, but I do slightly worry when I ask someone, how did you do this thing? And they say, I don't know. Okay, can we explore that? You must know some of the things you did. No, I don't know. I just kind of kept thrashing around until it worked. That's where I start to criticize some of these tools because I'm all for friction reduction for adopting things. Just like I said, I'd rather someone uses a Western Digital MyBook to back up than not back up at all. It would be better if they use ZFS. But I'm also not going to snap their MyBook over my knee and call them an idiot.
Not least of which because that'll get rid of their backups.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's like when I started talking about getting into Docker, we got loads of emails. Oh, you want to be using Podman? You want to be using Podman?
It's about being pragmatic, I think. And I do think if everyone could just calm down a little bit, it would be for the benefit of everyone. Just because someone says I stopped using something, it doesn't mean I also think the world should stop using it.
Well, and also, like, if you just pour that energy that you put into trolling people on the internet for not using the text editor you like into something productive, maybe you could make the world a better place. Maybe you could make the text editor a bit better and someone might switch back to it.
I mean, I have kind of a treatise here that I think I've given before, maybe not on this show, though, that social media is the root of most evil, including this. Not that people weren't having arguments on BBSs, but as a proto-social network, I suppose, that was still a problem.
I thought this was supposed to be hot takes. I think that's just perfectly reasonable. Social media is cancer. Don't use it.
I don't know. I think that it can be very, very easily, but it can also be really helpful and it can connect people in ways that nothing else really can.
Not if it's commercial. Also, I saw an article titled exactly this. Your body was not made to swallow the entire world's screams.
Yeah, but like if you're on Mastodon, say, or, you know, some other Fediverse thing, and you curate your experience properly, it can be really positive. I mean, there's also an awful lot of drama and bullshit on there, but you can avoid that, I think.
But it's exactly the kind of thing that causes this tribal behavior that we're currently hot taking.
Well, and not only that, right? It's fine until some large world event happens that people have differing views on. And then it's the same as any other social media where everyone wants to put their 2 penneth worth in. And it's just not a nice place to be when that happens, regardless of what your opinion is. Yeah, I go to some of these places to escape what the wider world is doing, particularly Mastodon. And now I just feel like I can't go there.
It does tend to whip people up, doesn't it, when they're behind a keyboard? But I do think if people could adopt a bit more of a, I use this and this is what's good about it attitude, rather than always the first thing being, this is why you're wrong. It's a tricky ask, I think. You know, I'm always looking at what the end product is. Recently, a very mundane example, I bought one of these energy monitoring plugs and I just wanted a Prometheus node exporter for it. You can write your own, but I was looking for some off-the-shelf ones. And the best one I found was written in C#, but I'm not going to go, I'm not using that because...
It's not written in Rust, not interested.
Yeah, exactly. Do you see what I mean? And yeah, okay, it makes it a little bit harder for me to grep some of the code because it's not a language that I'm as familiar with as, say, some of the other exporters, because you're tricking Prometheus into integrating with this device. But it's really well documented. The code is very clean, and ultimately it works. So that's the approach that I would take with anything. What is the end product of all this? Like, if you produce a quality table for me, if you're a carpenter, as long as it doesn't fall apart and I like how it looks, like, I'm not going to shit all over you while you're building it because you don't use what I think carpenters should use.
So for me, I think my hot take is that the LTS release model is broken.
Boom, wrong. Totally wrong. Go on.
Most software these days is packaged in such a way that whatever dependencies are on your 4-year-old LTS by the time that the next one rolls around that you're reasonably going to deploy in an enterprise environment are so outdated that it might not work. And likewise on the desktop, running an LTS that's any more than a year or so old starts to feel really crusty when you go and then try something new and discover that it's got a new display library or a new version of a desktop environment or something. I think we are very quickly approaching a point where the world has moved on from fixed release cadences, and particularly fixed release cadences that have certain versions of software with backported bug and security fixes that are just frozen in a point in time that might be a really long time ago by the time that you actually need to upgrade.
You're so wrong about this.
I was going to say, I do sort of agree with Gary, and the way I'm dealing with that is to just run XFCE so that things move so slowly that I just keep everything at arm's length. But the great thing about open source is you can read forums, GitHub repositories, you can see the struggles maintainers have. And it's difficult to backport your work to this stuff when you've just got it working and you know that it integrates with a fairly up-to-date stack underneath it. You don't have to be bleeding edge rolling. But if you're looking at that and someone raises a bug report and you just think, well, that's because that's really old, isn't it? So I can see Gary's viewpoint on this, and I'm not going to push back very hard on it.
Well, Chris, when someone comes to you at work and they're like, my Python 2.4 project won't run anymore. That's got to be how someone feels when you say, I'm running Debian 11 and the piece of software doesn't work now. It's your fault.
Right, but in a world of things like DistroBox, things like Docker, things like Snaps, Flatpaks, it doesn't matter, does it?
I think you're right to a degree, Joe, but the model that people seem to be gravitating towards there is to thin out the operating system layer. So if you look at, a very popular distribution for Kubernetes, which I'm sure Gary could chip in on, is Talos at the moment, where it's really interesting if you boot it up because it is minimal and console-based the minute you boot it up, and it puts itself in a live state to be infrastructure is coded to hell, and everything is layered in on top of that. And it's trickling through to George's work with Bluefin and everything. And I do think that's where the trend is going. So it's not so much about a large operating system that is an LTS. It's about as little as possible in the operating system so that it doesn't get crusty.
Well, and this is the way that I've run my personal infrastructure for years, and albeit it's using much older paradigms, right? But it's the bare minimum running on the underlying OS to then orchestrate my containers using Docker in my case, but it could be Podman or it could be a Flatpak on a desktop, to where actually I don't really care what the underlying OS is. And therefore, I don't need that LTS release model. What I need is a fast rolling stack that keeps up to date with the dependencies for the applications, and for the base distro to get the hell out of the way and let me run the applications. And you're right, Joe, that could all, in my case, be Ubuntu 18.04 for all I care. Not that it's getting security updates anymore, but that aside, it would do everything that the Fedora 42 server that I've just migrated a bunch of applications to could do, as far as I'm concerned. So therefore, the need for an LTS distro that sits around for 2 years just isn't there for me in that case.
I think it's context there as well, right? When I first switched from Ubuntu to Debian, I did try Plasma, and I just didn't last very long because every bug I found had been fixed, but not for me. And then I found, Nate on forums saying he was frustrated with that model because, I was that type of person that goes, it's not working for me. So, well, it works on the next point release after the freeze for your LTS distro. And with desktop environments, it's trickier, I think, because everything me and Gary just described, you can't do that. I mean, you can run desktop environments in DistroBox. I've done it for fun, but it's not going to be my daily driver. And I can see, again, that's why George is pushing in that direction, because it somewhat goes towards that.
And what you've tried to do, Chris, is move to a desktop environment that just doesn't change to work around this.
Yeah, it's funny with the Plasma desktop. Like you say, you've got all these bugs that have been fixed. And so the solution is to go for a distro that offers the latest Plasma with new bugs.
Well, if you were still sitting on a 2204 box, you may or may not have had those bugs fixed, depending on the motives of the developer, right? And you said, Chris, that Nate was getting annoyed with having to backport all of this stuff. And I can absolutely see why, if it's stuff that he's already done and is fixed, and I guess, like Joe said, slightly tongue-in-cheek, has moved on to creating new bugs that he could later fix.
I think there's a really big question about software sustainability here. Like, The only thing that's sustainable is XFCE, because it doesn't change at all. Is there something to be said about that? Are we maybe doing something wrong at a fundamental, like, industry-wide level?
Yes, things should get finished, and then they can be finished.
It is a very comfortable place to be in.
Unless you want to use Wayland.
Exactly. And I'm not saying that Sean's giving up, but you read the interim release notes for Ubuntu, and Sean's calling for maintainers to help him. And he's not giving up on it, but also it's hard when you're ploughing a furrow. The pace of change is slow. You maybe start working on another project as well to kind of get satisfaction to move things forward. That's when it starts to dwindle a bit. And look, I'm very happy where I am, but I'm not quite as steadfast as just going, yeah, it's just going to last forever. I do think Gary tapping at that door is going in one of my ears.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at reinstalling this L380 that I've got sitting next to me and looking at various desktop options because, okay, it's an 8th gen machine. It's got 32 gig of RAM, but running some of the effects on GNOME or KDE, it is getting a little bit long in the teeth. But your options to use something that is Wayland-based, which is now what I've become accustomed to, where I can watch a video without it tearing all over the place, are really quite difficult outside of those two main big desktop environments, which are now too heavy for my machine. And I'm really reticent to go and just install something like XFCE on it, because that just feels like a step backwards in my head.
All right. I think that the Linux media is hopelessly out of touch with the average Linux user.
Wait a minute, Joe. Are we currently
on the Linux media? Yes.
We're talking about ourselves.
Yeah, this is a bit meta, but like, if you think about YouTube, podcasts, blogs, like whatever, big websites, I think that we're just hopelessly out of touch with reality. Almost every single Linux user doesn't use it on the desktop for a start off. I've talked about that before. But even the ones who do run it on the desktop are like just running Ubuntu. Don't give a flying fuck about desktop environments and weird Arch-based distros and all the rest of it.
Well, as the token normal Linux user on this podcast, you're correct and we can move on.
Right, good. But if you watch YouTube videos about Linux and listen to podcasts about it, you could be forgiven for thinking that everybody wants all the latest new shiny bullshit. But I just don't think that's the reality.
Well, do you think most of them try it and then decide they like the old stuff better?
No, I don't think they even do that. I think that most people just don't care.
I think you're right. Honestly, I was listening to the radio just before we started recording, and there's an advert for Currys, and it just has a parade of, people going in to buy computers in the way that they buy a washing machine. Like,
yeah,
they really don't care. And if you filter your social media consumption, what you choose to read online, your RSS feeds, then yeah, of course, you think the world revolves around all this stuff. And it does for people that you seek out, but not everybody at all, not by a long chalk.
Well, I've got 2 examples of this from this week that maybe don't pertain to Linux users, but do pertain to the way that people like us look at computers. I was in a coffee shop and the plethora of random computers that people had, like everything from crappy Chromebook to a guy with a 17-inch MacBook Pro from 15 years ago to the occasional person using like a modern computer to just whatever crap Dell someone had bought from PC World. You're right, Chris. People don't care. And then the other thing that I realized that I do that was really weird is that I was using an RSS reader earlier this week. And my wife went, "Oh, did you change your email?" "What do you mean?" She's like, "That thing you're using, is that just email but for news?" "Why would you do that?" And I was like, "Well, I can see all of the news sources that I want to read in one place and they're just in a curated feed and I can look through them." And she's like, "Why would I want another thing to look through that's like email but it's news?" And then I was like, oh yeah, it probably is really weird to just pull all of this stuff into one place and not just navigate to the 8 different websites I want to see.
Yeah, but there is no CEO of RSS. I saw that message on this week. Like, wherever you get your podcasts and all that, that's such a powerful phrase.
Advocacy for this stuff very easily turns into things that annoy me and annoy people in general, if you run around screaming about stuff in people's faces, not only do they tend to not listen to you, they tend to do the thing you're telling them not to do because you're annoying them, and do it harder. So, if you start running around the coffee shop and go, no, you shouldn't be running this, you shouldn't be using that, you should get an old ThinkPad, no one's going to want to listen to you. And I do find it funny, Gary, that you mentioned the coffee shops, because the real, shitbag laptops that people have, with frayed power cables, pushing paper clips to make it charge, people really don't care, do they?
I watched a lady whose laptop very clearly had a bad display cable, and she turned it on and just started pinching around the edges of the display bezel until it looked like it was fine, and then just continued about her day. Now, if that were me, I could not stand that. And that machine would be going on the stack as a half top or something. But for her, that's just the shit HP that she had from 10 years ago, and it still ran a browser fine, so what does she care?
Well, that brings me to part of this hot take, is that one thing that we are hopelessly out of touch with is the reality of the hardware that most people use. Like me with my 13900K editing box, that's just ridiculous. Nobody except for, real enthusiastic gamers have a CPU that powerful. And I remember years and years and years ago, before I started doing this, so wow, that must be a long time ago, listening to a podcast where they did a challenge of let's use really shit old hardware. And it was newer than my laptop that they were talking about. And I'm like, what? Your version of shit old hardware. And it's the same when we did our £50 challenge. People wrote to us hang on, that shit thing that you got for £50 is way better than my daily driver.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with someone this week she was very concerned about the end of Windows 10 support. And I dug into what she was actually using, and it was a Penryn Core 2 Duo that originally came with Windows 7 and had got the free upgrade to Windows 10. So this machine is knocking on the door of 17, 18 years old at this point. It's the first batch of Windows 7 machines that came out. And she was concerned that if she got a Windows 11 machine, her video editor wouldn't work. And I said, it's probably going to be fine. What are you using? She's like, I'm using Serif Movie Plus 5.
Oh, what?
And I was like, yeah, that probably won't work if you get a Windows 11 machine. But my point being that this is just a normal person who bought that computer when Windows 7 came out in 2009 or whenever it was, and just continued to use it, and it got the free upgrade to Windows 10, and she continued to use it. And it's only now that she overheard someone talking about the end of life for Windows 10 that she's actually concerned about it, because it edits her videos that she gets off of her Sony Handycam or whatever it is absolutely fine, and it posts them on Facebook or whatever it is that she wants to do. So yeah, I think you're right. That is probably a fairly average story of a computer user in their mid-60s.
Most people would not spend more than $300 or $400 on a laptop.
Yeah, it really surprises me when I look around how few people have what I would describe as decent computing hardware, and they get by just fine.
Ultimately, those people are not, even if you make a very considered approach to say, there's an excellent computer called a ThinkPad, we could get your £300, and, immediately most people's reaction is, but that's secondhand, right? It's like, yeah, but
can you imagine what kind of ThinkPad you get for $300?
Well, yeah, I know, but people, that's still a hard sell. And then you're not going to give them the operating system they know. Are you going to pick up the phone when they phone you for questions? When I was younger, yes. Now, not so much enthusiastically, potentially. I've got to say, I think us included, Joe is right.
And most people go to extreme lengths not to own a computer. I was at a friend's house last week, and she decided that she would need the laptop and drove back to the office, which is like a 30-minute drive away, to go and get her laptop because she thought she might need it for the meeting that we were having. I said to her, do you not own a computer? And she's like, no, I have a phone and that's it. And she was willing to drive for an hour to get the laptop on the off chance that she might need to take some notes or edit a Google Sheet.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
And I've been May.
See you later.